and the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Africa and Global Health, Mr. Chris Smith, and I'd like to yield to Mr. Conyers the rest of our time. For 7.5 minutes, Mr. Smith.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 7.5 minutes.
For yielding and for her leadership, and for that of the chairman of the committee, Tom Lantos. He's been extraordinarily effective in this fight against modern-day slavery, and I thank him for his leadership as well. Mr. Speaker, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, Public Law 106-386, has made, we believe, an enormous positive difference in our efforts to end modern-day slavery, a nefarious enterprise that nets the exploiters billions of dollars each year. The 7-year-old landmark law and its numerous mutually reinforcing provisions to prevent trafficking, to protect victims, and to prosecute to the max those who traffic has been a model statute worldwide. Indeed, many of its provisions have been adopted into law in whole or in part by governments around the world. Mr. Speaker, the TVPA of 2000 does not pull any punches. By naming the names of countries out of compliance with what we call minimum standards, and by imposing smart sanctions that are prescribed in the Act, the withholding of non-humanitarian aid, for example, we have signaled to the world that ending this egregious practice is among the highest priorities of the United States. By protecting the victims, and not sending them back to their home country, where they are often exploited in a cycle of exploitation, we say to the victims, we will make every effort to make you safe and secure. By prosecuting the traffickers and imposing serious jail time, we are telling these exploiters that we are coming after you, and you are going to pay for your crimes. Since the enactment of the TVPA, the traffickers here and abroad are increasingly likely to face prosecution and conviction. In the 6-year period before its enactment, DOJ prosecuted 89 suspected traffickers. In the last 6 years, Justice Department has prosecuted 360, representing more than 300% increase. The Department has secured 238 convictions and guilty pleas, compared with 67 in the same period prior to the Act. And it has opened, importantly, 639 new investigations, an almost fourfold increase over the 128 prior to implementation of the law. Worldwide, nearly 6,000 traffickers were prosecuted last year alone, and more than 3,000 were convicted. Notwithstanding these successes, it is clear that even more has to be done to destroy this mob-infested criminal enterprise known as human trafficking. According to research sponsored by the U.S. government and completed in 2006, approximately 800,000 people are trafficked internationally, and millions more are trafficked within their country. According to the same research, the vast majority of transnational victims, almost 80%, are women and girls, and almost half of those 800,000 are minors. These figures are low compared to those posted by the International Labor Organization, which estimates 12.3 million people are subjected to forced labor, bonded labor, forced child labor, and sexual servitude. The bill before us today, Mr. Speaker, is a good one, is a great one. And I thank the gentleman from California, Mr. Lantos, for his extraordinary leadership on this. We are working in a partnership, and it is really making a difference. This legislation that is before us aims to update, expand, and improve our law. There have been lessons learned since the first law was enacted 7 years ago and subsequently reauthorized in 2003 and 2005. They are incorporated into this legislation as we try to do an even better job in mitigating the suffering of the victims while simultaneously going after those who traffic and the countries that harbor traffickers, or who are also part of the problem themselves. The bill is appropriately named after William Wilberforce, who was 21 years old when he was elected to the House of Commons in 1780. John Newton, the former slave captain turned convert to Christ, encouraged Wilberforce, as well as others, to fight the battle against slavery. Wilberforce agreed and then poured his heart into that battle. Wilberforce once said, "Never, never will we desist until we extinguish every trace of this bloody traffic, to which our posterity, looking back to the history of these enlightened times, will scarce believe that it has been suffered to exist so long, to disgrace and to dishonor this country." He said, so enormous, so dreadful, so remedial did the trade's wickedness quickly appear, that in my own mind was completely made up for its abolition. We need to fight with that kind of tenacity against this modern-day slave trade. Mr. Speaker, let me just say that one of the most prominent provisions of the original TVPA was the establishment of the tier ranking system that indicates how well or poorly a country is conforming to the minimum standards. We found when we created the watch list that some of the countries began to realize that they could be parked there. The Department of State accommodated, and unfortunately, they found that there was no penalty, even though they did not make any improvements. That is changed. 2 years, and then you're off that watch list, and hopefully off to improvements, and if not, you're put on the Tier 3, subject to penalties. Finally, let me just say, Mr. Speaker, that effective cooperation, and especially the bipartisan cooperation we see here today, and partnership with other countries is essential if we are to win this winnable war. Without it, we are doomed to either meager results or outright failure. With so many lives hanging in the balance, failure simply is not an option. None of us alone can stop human trafficking. Too much evil is involved here, and the prospect of making billions has enticed some of the most unsavory and cruel individuals on earth, including and especially organized crime. Too much demand, enabled by crass indifference, unbridled hedonism, and misogynistic attitudes, has turned people, especially women, into objects, only valued for their utility in the brothel or in the sweatshop. And the relative lack of visibility makes the task of combating trafficking all the more difficult. Trafficking, like germ, infection, and disease, thrives in the shadowy and murky places. But the contagion slows and it even dies when exposed to the light. This legislation brings more light, bright light, to this problem, and it acts as a powerful disinfectant. So the challenge to us today is to bring this new light, the bright light of sustained scrutiny, enacting good laws like this one, and then implementing them aggressively. We need to employ best practices and well-honed strategies in order to win the freedom of the slaves and to spare others unspeakable agony. Together we need to make the pimps and the exploiters pay, and pay serious by doing serious jail time, as well as the forfeiture of their assets, their boats, their villas, and their fat bank accounts. We can end this barbaric and utterly cruel modern-day slavery. Make no mistake about it, this is a winnable war, but we need to fight in a way so as to win. This legislation further propels us in that fight, and we will win this, and the slaves will be free. I yield back the balance of my time.
Has expired. Gentleman from Michigan.